Hey guys, tonight we wander back 2,000 years, into the candlelit heart of a Roman banquet hall. The air hums with chatter in Latin and Greek, the glow of oil lamps flickers on marble columns, and the smell, well, the smell is complicated. It's part roasted meat, part spices that came all the way from India, and part something fishy you can't quite place. You find yourself drifting into this world as if you've been invited to dine at the table of a Roman senator. You probably won't survive this feast because between the sheer calories and the questionable hygiene, let's just say your digestive system wouldn't thank you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, post your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You glance around the triclinium, the dining room where couches line three sides of a low table. You're reclining awkwardly on one elbow because that's how you're supposed to eat here, lying down, propped up like you're auditioning for a marble statue. It feels a bit silly, but that's Rome for you. Everything has its ritual. The first platters are carried in by slaves, and you can tell instantly this isn't going to be your average dinner. The dishes gleam with sauces so rich and unfamiliar that you're not sure whether to eat them or frame them. One mainstream fact historians always note: Roman banquets weren't just meals, they were political theater. A senator or wealthy patron invited you not just to fill your belly, but to show off his wealth, his connections, and his grasp of cultural sophistication. Food was a status symbol every bit as much as gold jewelry or marble villas. The stranger the dish, the better the brag. If your neighbor can serve lamb, you'll serve flamingo tongue. And here comes the first odd tidbit: a plate of oysters, glistening with seawater, even though you're nowhere near the coast. Romans perfected the art of transporting seafood from hundreds of miles away. Picture it, packed in clay jars, damp seaweed, hauled on carts over dirt roads in summer heat, just so a senator could slurp one oyster while smirking at his guests. You suspect at least one poor slave had to jog alongside with a bucket of melted snow just to keep the oysters fresh enough to not kill everyone. Historians still argue whether the Romans actually managed consistent freshness, or if food poisoning was just part of the elite dining experience. As you nibble cautiously, you hear a servant pouring out wine, except it's not the kind of wine you're used to. Roman wine, straight from the amphora, is so thick and strong it could probably strip the paint off your modern kitchen wall. They always diluted it, often 3 parts water to 1 part wine, sometimes even adding seawater or honey. To drink it straight was considered barbaric. You realize with a quiet chuckle that if you showed up at a Roman party with a no ice, just neat whiskey habit, you'd probably be looked at like a lunatic. The meal continues with a surprising mix of the familiar and the bizarre. You spot figs stuffed with nuts, cheese drizzled with honey, and because nothing is simple, little pastries dyed with saffron to give them a golden glow. It's like a mashup between a health food store, a Renaissance fair, and the kind of weird appetizer menu that tries too hard at a hipster restaurant. And here's a curious detail: sometimes they served what we might call stunt foods. Picture a roast pig brought out, only to be sliced open and spill live songbirds fluttering around the dining room. You blink, trying to imagine the health inspector's report. Historians debate whether this was a common practice or just one writer's exaggerated tale, but the idea that a dinner could double as a bird release party says a lot about Roman tastes for spectacle. As the first hour of feasting stretches on, you realize you're not just eating, you're part of a carefully staged experience. The table is a stage, the food the props, and every bite is meant to whisper, "Look at us, we are Rome, rulers of the world." You might be chewing on something strange, but you're also swallowing empire itself. You lean back on the cushioned couch, your stomach beginning to warm with wine and honey, when a new platter is brought forward. At first glance, it looks like a heap of small pastries, delicate little morsels the size of your palm. You reach for one, expecting a sweet bite, and instead notice the tiny whiskers, the curled paws, and yes, those unmistakable rodent tails tucked beneath a crisp golden crust. Tonight, you are about to try one of Rome's most infamous delicacies, dormice. Romans adored these little creatures, fattened up in special terracotta jars known as gleraria. Imagine an ancient hamster cage with tiny passageways, but instead of a squeaky wheel, it's a feed system designed to plump the animals until they were basically furry nuggets. To the Roman elite, dormice weren't vermin, they were a culinary luxury. Much like how modern gourmets drool over foie gras, Romans boasted of dormice stuffed with nuts, herbs, and even minced pork. You hesitate. The aroma is enticing, savory, nutty, with a hint of pepper. But still, you're aware you're about to bite into something you'd normally consider a pest in the attic. You take a cautious nibble and the taste is surprisingly mild, somewhere between chicken and hazelnut. You're not sure whether to be impressed or horrified. Mainstream historians confirm that dormice were a staple of Roman feasts, often mentioned by writers like Pliny and Apicius. The culinary manuals of the time even gave step-by-step instructions. Stuff the dormouse with a mixture of minced pork, pepper, and pine nuts, sew it shut, and roast it until the skin is crisp. You imagine a Roman chef fussing over a tray of them, grumbling like a modern baker about whether the filling was evenly distributed. And here's your quirky tidbit: not everyone approved of these furry hors d'oeuvres. The Roman Senate at one point even tried to ban dormouse consumption, perhaps because the practice was considered decadent or morally questionable. Yet bans rarely worked. People just found ways to skirt the rules. Historians still argue whether dormice were truly a mass delicacy or mostly a symbol of high-status gluttony, like modern truffle shavings or edible gold leaf. You glance around the table. The wealthier guests pop the little creatures into their mouths with nonchalance, as though it were no stranger than peanuts at a baseball game. You, however, chew slowly, trying not to picture whiskers. As the platters are cleared, the host raises his cup in a toast. You join the chorus of Io Saturnalia, though you're still not convinced the taste will ever leave your tongue. A servant replaces the empty plate with a bowl of figs stuffed with honey and nuts, a sweet chaser to soften the memory of rodent on a stick. The sweetness is soothing, and you wonder if the host planned this pairing on purpose. One bizarre bite, one comforting one, like a culinary roller coaster. A funny thought crosses your mind. Imagine explaining this to someone back home. "Yeah, I had dormice for dinner." They'd either think you were joking or sign you up for an episode of some extreme travel food show. But here in Rome, no one bats an eye. And because this is Rome, the conversation drifts into politics as easily as crumbs fall from bread. You overhear two senators debating the price of grain shipments from Egypt, while another whispers about the emperor's latest eccentricity. The dormice, in a way, are part of that conversation too. A subtle reminder that the empire stretches so wide and resources are abundant enough that even rodents can be pampered into luxury. You shift on your couch, noticing crumbs on your tunic. A slave silently brushes them away with a feather, because even crumbs are apparently undignified in this setting. You murmur thanks, though he doesn't respond. For him, this isn't a feast, it's another long night of service. The thought lingers, adding a bittersweet flavor to your already complex meal. Your host claps his hands, signaling the next course. You take a deep breath, both dreading and anticipating what else might appear on those shining silver trays. If dormice are just the appetizer, you wonder what's next. Maybe something with tentacles. Or maybe something involving that suspicious fishy smell that keeps wafting in from the kitchen. And so, as the servants retreat, you sip your watered wine and brace yourself for whatever odd delight Rome decides to feed you next. The clatter of bronze plates fades for just a moment, and then you smell it, sharp, salty, and undeniably fishy. You wrinkle your nose, and before you can even ask what's coming, a slave sets down a small jug at the center of the table. The liquid inside glistens golden brown under lamplight. A guest dips his bread into it with the eagerness of someone reaching for olive oil, but when he takes a bite, that pungent aroma intensifies. This, you soon learn, is garum. Not just any sauce, but the sauce of Rome, poured over nearly everything like a Roman version of ketchup. Except, instead of tomatoes, it's made from the fermented guts of fish. Yes, you heard right. Anchovies, mackerel, sometimes even the entire fish, were salted, crushed, and left to rot under the Mediterranean sun until their juices separated into a clear, rich liquid. The top layer, skimmed carefully, was the prized garum. Sounds horrifying. And in truth, if you stumbled across a jar of fermenting fish intestines in your neighbor's garage, you'd probably call the authorities. But here in ancient Rome, garum was liquid gold. So valuable, in fact, that different grades existed, with the finest bottles costing more than a soldier's monthly pay. Romans drizzled it over bread, meat, fruit, even desserts. Think of it as soy sauce crossed with Worcestershire, with a touch of mystery funk. You cautiously dip a crumb of bread into the jug and taste it. To your surprise, it isn't as revolting as your nose warned. It's rich, salty umami with a strange addictive pull. Like the first time you taste blue cheese. Weird but oddly irresistible. The other guests are practically drinking it, smearing it onto roasted meats and figs as if they can't get enough. You, however, sip your watered wine quickly afterward, just to steady your taste buds. Here's your mainstream fact. Garum production was a massive industry across the Roman world. Factories dotted the coast of Spain, Gaul, and North Africa, where workers spent their days gutting fish and layering them in vats with coarse salt. Amphorae full of the sauce traveled across the empire, stamped with labels like a fine wine. Some archaeologists even claim that you can still smell faint traces of garum in the ruins of Pompeii's shops, clinging to the plaster walls centuries later. And now for the quirky tidbit. Garum wasn't just food. Romans used it medicinally too, rubbing it on wounds, mixing it into tonics, even applying it as an aphrodisiac. Imagine your doctor today prescribing a teaspoon of rotten fish juice, twice daily. You'd switch doctors immediately, but for Romans, garum was a cure-all. Of course, historians still argue whether garum's fame was universal. Was it truly loved by all Romans, or was it a luxury flaunted by the elite? Some poorer households may have used watered-down versions, while the wealthiest boasted of owning the purest garum sociorum, the top-shelf fish juice. As you watch the jug make its way around the table, you can't help but smirk. Modern foodies chase after aged balsamic vinegar, Kraft soy sauce, or truffle oil. Ancient Romans? They had garum. Different ingredients, same obsession with flavors that shock, confuse, and ultimately seduce the tongue. The host notices your hesitation and chuckles, encouraging you to drizzle more onto your figs. Don't be shy, he says, the gods themselves could not feast without garum. You nod politely, though you're fairly sure the gods, if they exist, might have something to say about that. Still, you give in and splash a bit onto your fruit. The sweetness of the fig collides with the savory sauce in a way that's oddly delicious, like salted caramel centuries ahead of schedule. Around you, the conversation flows as freely as the wine. One man brags about importing the finest garum from Hispania, while another insists the African batches are superior. You lean back and imagine modern food critics rating garum vintages like fine Bordeaux. Ah yes, a subtle note of mackerel with a long briny finish. And because this is Rome, you can't help but laugh quietly at the absurdity. Last course you were chewing dormice, now you're sipping rotten fish sauce. What's next? Boiled ostrich? Monkey brains? You glance toward the kitchen doorway, catching a whiff of something smoky, and realize the night is far from over. The slaves clear the bread trays, leaving only the faint tang of garum lingering in the air. You wipe your hands on a linen cloth and sigh, already resigned to the fact that the sauce's aroma will cling to you long after the feast ends. Maybe even into your dreams. And with that thought, another set of trays arrives, and you can already tell the feast is about to take another strange turn. The smoky scent you caught earlier thickens now, curling through the lamplight until it settles over the table like a cloak. Slaves march in with heavy platters, and you blink twice to make sure your tired eyes aren't deceiving you. On one tray lies something massive, dark, and unmistakably feathered. The host beams as though he's just pulled a prize out of a magician's hat. Yes, an ostrich. Or at least, a suspiciously large portion of one. Its long neck has been carved into thick slices, roasted and glistening with oil, then arranged in overlapping spirals like some exotic centerpiece. The smell is rich, greasy, meaty, with a faint sweetness from honey glaze. You can't help but stare. You've probably seen ostriches at a zoo or maybe on a wildlife documentary sprinting across the desert. But here? They're dinner. A servant cuts you a slice and drops it on your plate. You prod it cautiously. The texture is strange, firm, almost beef-like, but the flavor surprises you. It's gamey but not unpleasant. You chew slowly, trying to imagine Romans trekking across North Africa, hunting down these birds just to bring them back for someone's dinner brag. Here's the mainstream fact. Ostrich really did appear on Roman tables, especially in the kitchens of the wealthy. In fact, one recipe book attributed to Apicius, a famous Roman gourmand, includes instructions for boiling ostrich meat and serving it with a peppery sauce thickened with dates. Imagine the logistics of that. Capturing an ostrich, transporting it alive or slaughtered, keeping it fresh, and finally cooking it for a banquet that demanded spectacle as much as flavor. And now for the quirky tidbit. Romans didn't just eat ostrich. They sometimes decorated their feasts with its feathers, using them to fan the diners while they chewed the very bird they came from. Talk about recycling. You glance at the tall plumes adorning the couches and wonder if they once belonged to the bird you're now gnawing on. Historians still argue whether these exotic dishes were actually common or just rare stunts. Did wealthy Romans really eat ostrich regularly, or did writers exaggerate to make the upper class seem even more extravagant? After all, what better way to criticize Rome's elite than to accuse them of wasting fortunes importing giant birds while peasants barely scrape together barley bread? The room buzzes as the ostrich disappears slice by slice. A tipsy senator brags that he once hosted a feast with not one, but 2 whole ostriches. Another man chimes in with a tale of roasted peacocks, complete with their colorful tails reattached for dramatic flair. You nearly choke on your bite, imagining guests clapping as a bird with its feathers pinned back together is paraded through the room like a resurrected parade float. You laugh softly to yourself, realizing this dinner is less about eating and more about theater. Sure, the ostrich tastes fine, but the real flavor comes from the shock value. It's the Roman version of a Michelin-starred tasting menu designed for Instagram, except instead of a $30 plate of foam, you're staring at roasted megafauna. As the servants carve the last of the ostrich, the host insists you try it dipped in garum. Of course. Because what's one giant bird without a splash of fermented fish juice? You obey politely, but when the salty funk mingles with the already gamey ostrich, you nearly regret it. Your neighbors grin, chewing happily, their mouths glistening with oil. You sip more watered wine, praying the next dish is something simple. And just when you think you might get a reprieve, another tray appears. This one carries smaller skewers, arranged like a soldier's arsenal. The meat is dark, almost blackened, threaded tightly onto sticks. You take one, turn it over, and notice the faint ridges of scales? Your host laughs at your hesitation. Snake, he says proudly. Freshly grilled. Romans say it tastes like chicken. Of course they do. Everything strange somehow tastes like chicken. You take a tentative bite. And annoyingly it really does. Chewy, smoky, with a hint of wildness, but not too far off from poultry. The others devour theirs eagerly, debating whether snake cures illnesses or boosts strength. Some claim it prevents bad dreams. Others insist it's an aphrodisiac. You're just trying to make sure it doesn't wriggle on your plate. Mainstream fact? Romans did indeed eat snake. It wasn't as common as pork or beef, but accounts survive of reptile roasts at banquets. And quirky tidbit? Roman doctors occasionally prescribed snake broth for sore joints and fevers, calling it warming for the body. If your modern pharmacist recommended that, you'd probably walk straight out. Historians still argue whether snake meat was seen as delicacy, medicine, or punishment for daring guests. But here, with wine flowing and laughter rising, you suspect the truth lies somewhere between health remedy and party dare. You lean back on your couch, slightly dazed. In the span of one meal, you've eaten dormouse, drowned your figs in rotten fish juice, carved up an ostrich, and nibbled on a reptile. You glance at the empty trays and wonder what on earth could possibly follow this carnival of flavors. And then, as if in answer, you hear the clatter of a new platter arriving from the kitchen. The smell hits you before you see it, rich, fatty, undeniably porky. Something far more familiar. At last, you think a dish you might actually recognize. But of course this is Rome. Familiarity never comes without a twist. The smell grows stronger as the slaves approach, filling the triclinium with that unmistakable, mouth-watering richness. Your stomach tightens. Pork. At last, something you know, something simple, something safe. The platter arrives, carried high, gleaming under the lamplight, and everyone leans forward in anticipation. But of course it isn't just pork. Not in Rome. The slaves set it down and your eyes widen. Before you lies not just a roasted pig, but a roasted pig stuffed with more animals. The skin is golden, crackling with oil, and when the carver slides a knife into its belly, the whole thing bursts open like some culinary piñata. Out tumble sausages, tiny birds, and even bits of fish, all spilling onto the platter in a chaotic cascade. The room erupts in applause. Yes, applause. This isn't dinner. It's theater. Mainstream fact? Romans loved stuffed dishes, and some feasts became legendary for their culinary nesting dolls. Whole pigs were roasted with geese inside them, the geese stuffed with chickens, the chickens stuffed with sausages. It was indulgence layered upon indulgence, designed to shock as much as satisfy. Quirky tidbit? One recipe describes a whole pig stuffed with live birds. Imagine cutting it open and dozens of doves fluttering out into the dining hall while guests clapped, mouths hanging open. Dinner as performance art, centuries before Las Vegas buffets. You take a slice of the pork and relief washes over you at the first bite. It's crispy, salty, deeply satisfying. For a moment, you feel grounded again. This is food you understand: meat, fat, salt. And then you hit the stuffing. The pork blends into goose, then into spicy sausage, then a sudden hit of fishy tang. Your palate reels, but the senator beside you is laughing so hard he nearly spills his wine. Exquisite, he cries, bits of goose clinging to his beard. Historians debate whether these extravaganzas were regular feasts or rare spectacles for the truly wealthy. After all, pigs were common fare in Rome, cheap, easy to raise, and a staple of the poor as much as the rich. But here on these couches, pork becomes something else, a stage trick. You can't help but think of modern chefs serving deconstructed this and fusion, that, all in the name of novelty. Rome just got there 2,000 years earlier. As the pig is carved down to bones, servants sweep away the platters and bring in something gentler, sweeter. A tray of small bowls, steaming slightly, is passed down the line. The liquid glimmers, tinted with honey. You lift one to your lips, sniff and pause. Why? But not the kind you're used to. This is mulsum, wine sweetened with honey, warmed gently until it glows like liquid amber. The first sip coats your tongue in syrupy richness, the second delivers a sharp kick of alcohol that burns down your throat. You cough softly, but your neighbors raise their cups, laughing, toasting, spilling half of it down their tunics. Mainstream fact? Mulsum was a Roman favorite, especially at the start of meals. Sweetened wines were considered both luxurious and medicinal. To the Romans, honey wasn't just sugar, it was medicine, magic, even a gift from the gods. Quirky tidbit? Romans sometimes mixed wine not only with honey but with seawater. Yes, seawater. They believed it added briskness to the drink. You eye your cup, silently praying tonight's isn't one of those batches. The drink loosens tongues even further. Senators argue over who can drink the most. A poet at the corner begins reciting verses, slurring half the words. Someone throws a fig at him, it splatters on the wall. The room hums with warmth and chaos. And just when you're beginning to think the evening might be winding down, the clatter of more trays rings out from the kitchen. The smell this time is different. Not savory, not sharp, but sweet, rich, almost floral. Dessert. But dessert in Rome isn't cake or pie. It's stranger, subtler, and sometimes unsettling. The first dish arrives. Small cakes made of cheese and honey, fried until crisp at the edges and soft in the middle. They're called globi and they melt on your tongue, leaving behind a sticky sweetness that coats your teeth. Children in modern times might call it a donut, but here, in this room, it feels like luxury. Mainstream fact? Honey was the main sweetener in Rome, and nearly every dessert leaned on it. Sugar, after all, wouldn't reach Europe for centuries. So honey cakes, honeyed nuts, even fruits soaked in honey were common. Quirky tidbit? Some Roman recipes called for pepper sprinkled on top of desserts. Yes, pepper on sweet cakes. You glance at your plate, relieved that tonight's cook seems to have spared you that experiment. The next tray holds figs stuffed with nuts and drizzled with more honey. A senator nudges you, grinning with a mouthful of figure. Aphrodisiac, he whispers, winking. You nod politely, resisting the urge to roll your eyes. Historians argue whether Roman desserts were served at the end of meals or scattered throughout, since the order of dining was far less rigid than today. Tonight it hardly matters. The guests grab the sweets greedily, smearing honey across their beards, licking their fingers. You take a bite of the fig, chew slowly, and lean back on the couch. For the first time all evening you feel full, not just in the stomach but in the senses. You've eaten dormice, ostrich, snake, pork stuffed with half the barnyard, and now honey-drenched figs. Your mind spins with the richness, the absurdity, the sheer theater of it all. And then, from the far end of the room, a slave announces something that makes the whole company cheer. Another course. You groan inwardly. How can there possibly be more? But in Rome, enough is never truly enough. The next course, you're told, is meant not to feed the body, but to dazzle the imagination. Finale. A showstopper. The slaves disappear into the kitchen, and you hear the clatter of metal, the shouts of cooks, the rush of fire. You brace yourself. Whatever is about to arrive won't just be food. It will be spectacle. The triclinium grows hushed. Even the drunken poet stops mid-rhyme as the scent of smoke and spices billows out from the kitchen. You catch a flicker of orange flame, hear the hiss of fat dripping onto hot coals. Every eye fixes on the doorway. Whatever comes next has been planned not as nourishment but as climax. And then, with a flourish, the slaves emerge. Carried between them is a vast silver platter, so large it takes 4 men to hold it steady. Upon it lies a creature that seems half real, half fantasy. You blink twice, certain your wine-blurred eyes deceive you. It is a boar. But not just a boar. Its tusks gleam with gold leaf. Its body has been sewn shut with thread of bright crimson, and sprouting from its mouth is not a tongue, but a cascade of roasted thrushes spilling outward as though the animal itself vomits a feast. Around its body, cooks have arranged garlands of bay leaves, fennel, and rosemary, and the whole monstrous form glistens with glaze. The senators cheer. Someone claps. A woman gasps, covering her mouth in delight and disgust at once. Mainstream fact? Romans adored the Trojan boar. It was a showpiece in which an entire boar was roasted, gutted, and then stuffed with smaller animals, sometimes dozens at once. Birds, sausages, even fish would tumble out when it was carved. A visual pun on the Trojan horse, it symbolized both abundance and cunning. Quirky tidbit? In some accounts, the boar was presented with its belly sewn shut and a knife chained beside it. The host would theatrically free the animal, cutting it open to unleash its hidden banquet. A bit of culinary theater designed to amaze guests, whether or not the flavor was worth it. You feel your stomach groan in protest, but there is no refusing. The carver steps forward, slashes the crimson thread, and the boar splits open with a hiss of steam. Out tumble songbirds, their tiny bodies already roasted brown, along with sausages, oysters, and chestnuts. The room explodes in applause once more. You take a bird hesitantly. Its skin is crisp, the meat surprisingly tender, and it tastes faintly of smoke and pepper. Not unpleasant, but your body rebels at the excess. How many courses has this been now? 6? 7? The line between appetite and survival has blurred. And yet, the Romans press on. Another tray follows, this one less grotesque but just as bewildering. Bowls of green sauce, vivid as emeralds, are placed before the diners. You dip a finger in, sniff, and recoil. It smells sharp, almost medicinal. You dab it on your bird and taste. Parsley, mint, coriander, vinegar, honey, and oil, all blended into a punch that burns your nose and cleanses your tongue. Mainstream fact? This was garum's cousin, a herb sauce beloved by Romans, often paired with roasted meats. Garum itself, the fermented fish sauce of the empire, was used in almost everything from meat to desserts. To modern tongues it would taste pungent, almost rotten, but to the Romans it was liquid gold. Quirky tidbit? So essential was garum that amphorae of it traveled across the empire like today's Coca-Cola. Factories on the coast stank of fermenting fish guts, yet the sauce commanded high prices. Imagine a delicacy brewed in vats of rotting anchovies and you begin to understand Rome's peculiar palate. You swallow hard, forcing down the tang of herbs and fish, and glance around the room. Some senators are red-faced, sweating, their bellies straining against silk. Others are still ravenous, demanding more. The host beams, delighted at the spectacle. At last, though, the frenzy begins to ebb. Slaves clear away the bones, the shells, the shattered bits of pottery. The air is thick with smoke, grease, honey, and wine. You feel both exhausted and overstimulated, as though you have run a marathon without moving from your couch. But there is one last tradition to endure. A final toast. Slaves refill the cups with wine, stronger this time, unmixed, almost black in the lamplight. The host raises his goblet, shouting a Latin phrase you barely catch. The room echoes it back, voices booming, cups clashing, wine spilling down beards and onto tunics. You sip cautiously, the raw strength of it biting at your throat, making your eyes water. And then the room begins to dissolve into chaos. Some guests laugh until they weep. Others stagger to their feet and collapse back onto the couches. One senator begins to sing loudly, terribly, until someone hushes him with a handful of dates shoved into his mouth. You lean back, dizzy, your mind reeling. You have not simply eaten. You have witnessed Rome's values in edible form. Abundance as a weapon. Luxury as theater. Appetite as conquest. Historians often say that the Roman feast was more than dinner. It was a statement of power, wealth, and identity. Tonight you understand. For the senators, this wasn't about food at all. It was about being seen eating what no ordinary Roman could ever imagine tasting. As the torches gutter low and the last songs slur into silence, you close your eyes. Your stomach aches, your tongue still tingles with herbs and honey, but one thought anchors itself in your mind. This empire will one day fall. And when it does, perhaps it will be under the weight of its own appetite. When morning finally breaks, you wake not in your bed but still upon the triclinium's couch, your body sore, your throat parched. The hall reeks of stale wine, charred meat, and extinguished oil lamps. Around you lie senators sprawled in drunken sleep, their once pristine tunics stained with sauce and sweat. Servants pick quietly through the wreckage, collecting goblets, scraping bones into baskets, and trying not to wake those who snore like lions. You push yourself upright, your head swimming, and stagger outside. Cool dawn air washes your lungs. For the first time in hours, you can think clearly. And in that clarity comes perspective. Rome was not the only ancient world obsessed with food. If you turn your eyes eastward, another great civilization also carved its identity into cuisine. The Greeks. Mainstream fact? Greek dining revolved around the symposium, not quite a feast but a drinking party. Guests reclined like Romans, but the focus was not food, it was wine, poetry, and philosophy. In Athens, men debated politics and wisdom over diluted wine, while lyres plucked softly in the background. Meals were simple: olives, cheese, bread, and fish. Quirky tidbit? Greeks considered water-mixed wine civilized, but drinking wine unmixed was barbaric. The Persians, they scoffed, guzzled their wine neat. To the Greek, moderation was refinement. To the Roman, excess was glory. Imagine yourself now transported to a Greek symposium. You recline on a cushion, sipping watered wine, listening to Plato himself unravel questions about justice and love. No boars stuffed with birds, no oceans of garum, no honey-drizzled nightmares. Just bread dipped in olive oil, figs passed between friends, and laughter rising into the night. And yet, even here, food carries meaning. To eat simply was a mark of wisdom. To resist gluttony was to show virtue. The Greeks placed restraint on a pedestal where Romans exalted abundance. From Greece, your journey carries you farther east still, into the cradle of Mesopotamia. Here, life centered not on symposia but on survival. Farmers bent their backs to coax barley and wheat from the Fertile Crescent, while scribes etched cuneiform tablets recording rations of bread and beer. Mainstream fact? Beer was the daily drink of Mesopotamia. Thick, cloudy, and full of grains, it was consumed by all classes, children included. To drink beer was to live, for water itself was often unsafe. Workers were even paid in beer rations, sometimes as much as 2 liters a day. Quirky tidbit? Ancient Mesopotamians drank their beer with long straws made of reeds, plunging them into large communal jars. Without the straw, you'd choke on the mash of grains that floated on top. Picture a room of workers, all slurping together from one giant pot, buzzing like bees around honey. Food here was not lavish but essential. Onions, garlic, lentils, dates, and barley stews filled the pots. Meat was rare and precious, often sacrificed to the gods before it ever touched mortal lips. To eat in Mesopotamia was not to flaunt wealth but to honor survival, community, and the divine. As the sun climbs higher in your imagination, you drift southward into Egypt, where the Nile dictates every meal. Bread again is the heartbeat, baked from emmer wheat, coarse and dense. Fish from the river, cucumbers, melons, leeks, and dates fill the markets. Honey sweetens what little luxury the commoner might taste. Mainstream fact? Like Mesopotamians, Egyptians adored beer. Tomb paintings show brewers at work, mixing mash, straining it, pouring it into jars. Beer was not just drink, it was medicine, ritual, and even payment. Quirky tidbit? Archaeologists found loaves of bread in tombs, baked thousands of years ago, still intact. Hard as stone now, but once soft, earthy, and life-giving. Some loaves even bear fingerprints of bakers long dead, a ghostly touch, preserved in crust for eternity. Food here was deeply tied to the afterlife. The wealthy dead were buried with food offerings. Bread, beer, dried meats, figs. A pharaoh expected to feast forever in the field of reeds, his paradise an eternal harvest where the grain grew high and the beer never soured. And so, as you wander from Rome's decadence to Greece's restraint, from Mesopotamia's straws to Egypt's tomb loaves, you see a pattern. Food is never just sustenance. It is philosophy, religion, politics, memory. Civilizations reveal themselves in what they ate, and how. But there are more worlds still to taste. Beyond the Nile's fertile banks lies India, land of spices, where food sang of flavor long before Rome knew pepper. Beyond India, China's dynasty steamed dumplings and brewed teas that would one day conquer the world's palate. And you, weary traveler, are not yet finished. You rise from the Nile's banks and drift eastward, your footsteps carried on the warm breath of desert winds, then through mountains and jungles, until the air grows thick with the aroma of spice. India. A land where food is not merely sustenance, but ritual, medicine, and poetry. Mainstream fact? Ancient Indian diets were shaped by the Vedas and Ayurveda, texts that blended philosophy with health. Food was divided into categories: sattvic, pure, harmonious foods like fruits, grains, and milk; rajasic, stimulating like onions, garlic, and spicy fare; and tamasic, heavy or intoxicating such as meat and alcohol. What you ate was tied directly to your soul's balance. Vegetarianism flourished here long before the word existed in the West. Cows, sacred to Hindu tradition, were rarely slaughtered. Instead, dairy, milk, ghee, curds became holy nourishment. Rice steamed in clay pots, lentils simmered with turmeric, flatbreads puffed over open flames. Quirky tidbit? Black pepper, now a humble shaker on every Western table, was once so precious in Rome it was worth its weight in gold. Traders risked deserts and oceans to bring it back from India. What you sprinkle absent-mindedly on your eggs was once an empire's obsession. You imagine yourself seated cross-legged upon a reed mat, steam rising from a thali, an array of bowls filled with rice, dal, spiced vegetables, yogurt, and pickles. Each dish a note in a symphony, balancing hot with cool, sour with sweet. Eating here is not indulgence. It is harmony, a way of keeping the body in rhythm with the cosmos. But your journey does not end here. Push farther east and you find yourself along the banks of the Yellow River, China, the Middle Kingdom, where food is the heart of culture, politics, and philosophy. Mainstream fact? Rice in the south, millet in the north, soybeans, pork, cabbage, ginger, garlic. This was the foundation of Chinese cuisine thousands of years ago. Fermentation was already an art. Soy sauce, rice wine, and pickled vegetables transformed the simple into the extraordinary. Tea too had its roots here. At first, not the refined ritual of later dynasties, but a humble leaf boiled in water, sometimes mixed with onion, ginger, or rice. The drink would one day cross oceans, spark wars, and fuel empires, but here it was warmth and comfort. Quirky tidbit? The world's oldest intact noodle bowl was found in China, made of millet and over 4,000 years old. Long, delicate strands, buried in an overturned bowl beneath yellow soil. Imagine the last hand to touch them, never knowing they'd wait millennia for rediscovery. Dining in China was, and remains, communal. Food is shared from central dishes, chopsticks plucking harmony from a round table. Confucian ideals seep into every bite: order, respect, balance. Even the cut of vegetables is not arbitrary. Uniform slices mean fair cooking, equal sharing. You picture yourself in a Han Dynasty home. A clay pot simmers with pork belly and fermented greens. Steam fogs the air. Around the table, family members talk, laugh, and offer bites across dishes. No feast of spectacle, no Roman gluttony. Instead, a celebration of togetherness, of food as glue holding community. And yet, across Asia, food was also empire. Spices from India and silk from China traveled westward along dusty roads and stormy seas. The Silk Road was not only silks and jewels, it was cinnamon, cardamom, saffron, ginger. Roman senators, Greek philosophers, Persian kings, all craved the tastes born of Indian soil and Chinese hearths. And caravans of camels trudged across deserts, bearing tiny sacks of spice worth more than gold. Quirky tidbit? Sailors navigating the Indian Ocean sometimes relied on spices to mask the taste of spoiled meat on long voyages. Pepper and cloves did more than flavor, they saved stomachs from disaster. As you drift across these lands, you feel a great truth unfolding. The world was already connected by the tongue long before it was united by maps. A Roman diner sprinkling pepper on roasted lamb, a Chinese farmer boiling noodles, an Indian priest offering milk to the gods, all were unknowingly tied together, bound by trade, desire, and the universal need to taste. But your journey is not yet done. To the west lies another shore, another empire that mixed maize with ritual and cacao with gods. The Americas wait, their civilizations shaping foods the old world had never dreamed of: corn, potatoes, tomatoes, chocolate. Foods that would one day cross oceans and change the diets of every people alive. And you, traveler, must go there next. You drift across oceans, carried westward by the breath of time, until the air grows heavy with humidity and the canopy above you trembles with parrots and jaguars. You are in the Americas, lands where civilizations thrived long before European sails cut the horizon. Here, food was not just fuel. It was creation, sacrifice, identity. The Maya. You find yourself in the jungles of the Yucatan, temples rising above green forests like stone mountains. At the heart of Mayan life is maize, corn. Not simply a crop, but the very substance of humanity. According to the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Maya, the gods formed humans from maize dough. To eat corn was to consume your own essence, to honor your divine origin. Tortillas, tamales steamed in husks, gruel like a toll. Maize was ground, cooked, transformed in countless ways. Alongside it grew beans and squash, completing a trinity that sustained millions. Quirky tidbit? Mayans also brewed a frothy, bitter drink of cacao mixed with water, chili, and honey, far from today's sweet chocolate. It was believed to grant vigor, wisdom, even a touch of the divine. Kings drank it in golden vessels, warriors carried it into battle. You sit cross-legged before a stone altar. A priest offers cacao to the gods, pouring it from one vessel to another high above his head, so the liquid froths into a thick foam. Around you, the smell of roasted cacao beans lingers in the night air. The Aztecs. Farther north, in the Valley of Mexico, rises Tenochtitlan, a city on water, its markets bursting with goods. Here, maize is still king, but so are chilies, tomatoes, amaranth, and avocado. The Aztecs cultivated floating gardens, chinampas, rafts of reeds piled with soil, drifting upon lakes, yielding crops in dazzling abundance. Mainstream fact? The Aztecs valued cacao so highly they used its beans as currency. A rabbit might cost 10 cacao beans, A turkey egg. 3. To drink cacao was a luxury reserved for nobles and warriors, flavored with spices and sometimes blood, linking it to sacrifice. Quirky tidbit? The Aztec Emperor Montezuma was said to drink as many as 50 cups of spiced cacao a day to fuel his vigor and passion. Chocolate, in this sense, was not dessert. It was power, sensuality, even danger. You imagine standing in the great market of Tlatelolco, stalls bursting with maize cakes, tamales stuffed with beans, steaming stews of turkey or fish. The air tingles with chili smoke, vibrant colors, the pulse of life. The Inca. Southward, through mountains that scrape the sky, you enter the realm of the Inca, stretching along the Andes. Here, farming meant carving life into stone. Terraces clung to cliff sides, irrigated by canals fed from glaciers. Their diet revolved around potatoes, hundreds of varieties from tiny bitter tubers to large golden ones. The Inca developed chuno, a freeze-dried potato made by exposing the crop to freezing nights and drying days, then trampling them underfoot to remove moisture. Lightweight, lasting for years, it fed armies and cities alike. Mainstream fact? The Inca also domesticated quinoa, a grain rich in protein, cooked into porridges or ground into flour. Alongside it came maize beer, chicha, fermented and drunk in rituals. Quirky tidbit? To make chicha, women chewed maize co. You see yourself in Cuzco, heart of the empire, offered a cup of chicha by a villager as a sign of friendship. Its sour tang bites your tongue, a taste both strange and eternal. The foods of the Americas were unlike anything the Old World had known. Maize, potatoes, tomatoes, cacao, chilies, avocado, plants that would one day spread across the globe, transforming kitchens from Rome to Beijing. Imagine Italy without tomatoes, Ireland without potatoes, India without chilies. Impossible. Yet all of it begins here in these lands long before Columbus. Quirky tidbit? Archaeologists discovered traces of popcorn nearly 5,000 years old in caves in New Mexico. Imagine a campfire in the distant past, kernels bursting into white blossoms, laughter rising into the night sky. Snacking, it seems, is as ancient as civilization itself. And so, traveler, you taste maize, cacao, potatoes, tomatoes. You see food as God, as currency, as survival. You realize that every bite you take today, bread, chocolate, fries, pizza, owes something to these peoples, their soil, their ingenuity. But the journey does not end here. Beyond the high Andes and the jungles of cacao lies another era. Ships will soon arrive, sails white as teeth, carrying not only hunger but conquest. The Columbian exchange will fuse the world's tables forever, spreading wheat to the new world and maize to the old. The age of isolation is ending. The age of global food has begun. You sail across stormy seas, the year now 1492 and beyond. White sails cut into the horizon, carrying not just men and cannon, but seeds, animals, disease, and hunger. This is the Columbian Exchange, the greatest swap in human history, a mingling of foods and fates that would transform every table on earth. The old world to the new. From Europe, Africa, and Asia came wheat, barley, rice, sugarcane. Grapes and olives followed, then coffee and bananas, carried in ships' holds, planted in foreign soil. The Spanish brought pigs, cattle, sheep, and horses, beasts unseen in the Americas for millennia. Imagine being an Inca farmer watching horses thunder across the Andes for the first time, giant, snorting creatures that seemed like gods of war. Imagine maize farmers in Mexico seeing pigs rooting through their fields, multiplying faster than they could control. Mainstream fact? Wheat became a staple in European colonies, baked into breads that reminded settlers of home. Sugarcane flourished in Caribbean soil, feeding the rise of plantations, slavery, and empire. Quirky tidbit? The arrival of European honeybees to the New World, called the white man's fly by Native Americans, reshaped landscapes. Pollination patterns changed, honey entered diets, and buzzing swarms became a permanent part of American meadows. The New World to the Old. But the exchange worked both ways, and here lies the true revolution. From the Americas flowed foods that the Old World had never tasted. Maize, potatoes, tomatoes, cacao, chilies, peanuts, and tobacco. Potatoes spread to Europe and changed everything. In Ireland, they became the poor man's bread, so productive that a family could live off a small plot. In Russia, they were so distrusted at first, seen as devilish underground apples, that peasants resisted planting them. Yet in time, they became vodka's soul and the backbone of stews. Tomatoes journeyed to Italy, where they were once feared as poisonous love apples. Only later did they become the heart of pasta sauce and pizza, shaping Italian cuisine forever. Maize traveled to Africa, where it grew well in poor soils, sustaining millions. It became ugali in Kenya, sadza in Zimbabwe, fufu in West Africa. Yet it also created dependency, and where maize spread without its native companions, beans and squash, malnutrition sometimes followed. Chilies ignited kitchens in India, Thailand, and China, transforming curries and stir-fries. Imagine Sichuan food without its burning bite or Indian masalas without heat. It was unimaginable until this fiery fruit arrived from Mexico. Chocolate and coffee soon met in Europe, creating cafes where philosophers, merchants, and rebels debated revolution. The bitter cacao drink of the Maya and Aztecs was sweetened with sugar and milk, becoming a luxury, and then a craving. Quirky tidbit? When hot chocolate first appeared in London's coffee houses in the 17th century, some clerics denounced it as sinful indulgence. Others, however, praised it as medicine, claiming it could cure melancholy, aid digestion, and even spark romance. The dark side of the exchange. Of course, not all gifts were blessings. With the ships came smallpox, measles, and influenza, decimating indigenous populations. Some scholars estimate that up to 90% of Native Americans perished in the first century after contact. The foods that nourished empires also paved the way for conquest and sorrow. Sugarcane-fueled slavery. Plantations in the Caribbean demanded endless labor, pulling millions of Africans into brutal chains. Coffee, tobacco, cotton. These crops became currencies of suffering, commodities that reshaped continents. The world transformed. Yet when you sit down at your modern table, bread baked from wheat, fries from potatoes, tomato sauce on pasta, chocolate for dessert, you are tasting the Columbian exchange. No nation, no kitchen, no palate escaped it. Close your eyes and imagine. A French peasant sipping potato soup. An Italian baker spreading tomato sauce on flatbread. An Indian cook sprinkling chilies into curry. A Ghanaian farmer pounding maize into fufu. A Spaniard savoring chocolate sweetened with Caribbean sugar. These moments, ordinary and eternal, exist only because the seas were crossed, because worlds collided. Quirky tidbit? Historians argue that the potato, more than any king or general, fueled Europe's population boom in the 18th and 19th centuries. Cheap, calorie-rich, and adaptable, it allowed families to grow larger, armies to march farther, empires to rise higher. One humble tuber reshaped history. The Columbian exchange was both miracle and tragedy, feeding billions, sparking cuisines, but also binding the world in slavery, conquest, and loss. And you, traveler, now taste its legacy in every bite you take. But your journey is not finished. From the global collision of foods, the story moves forward, into the birth of modern empires, into spice wars, into sugar, coffee, and tea shaping revolutions. The table of history stretches on. The next course awaits. You step into the markets of the 16th and 17th centuries, where the air itself seems thick with scent. Cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, black pepper, sugar, and coffee. Here, food is no longer just sustenance. It is power, empire, and revolution. The spice wars. Long before supermarkets sold jars of spice for a few coins, these flavors were worth their weight in gold. Black pepper, shipped from India, was called black gold in Europe. Nutmeg from the Banda Islands, cloves from the Moluccas, cinnamon from Ceylon. Each was so precious that men risked oceans and wars for them. The Portuguese, the Dutch, and later the English fought bitterly to control spice routes. Ships armed like floating fortresses sailed the seas. Villages in the Spice Islands were raised, and treaties carved up oceans as if they were maps of treasure. Mainstream fact? Nutmeg was once believed to cure the plague. Europeans sprinkled it into wine, soups, even chewed it raw, desperate for protection. Its allure drove the Dutch East India Company to slaughter entire island populations to secure monopoly. Quirky tidbit? In 1667, the Dutch traded the tiny nutmeg-rich island of Run to the British, in exchange for a swampy little place in the Americas. That swamp became New York City. A global trade pivoted on a handful of spice trees. Sugar, the sweet engine. Sugar was once a rare luxury, sold in cones and shaved delicately into teas. But as European appetites grew, sugarcane plantations in the Caribbean and Brazil expanded. It became the white gold of empire, reshaping diets, and enslaving millions. Imagine a Londoner in 1700, sweetening her tea with a spoonful of sugar. Behind that spoon lay an entire chain. African slaves cut cane under the burning sun, ships carried raw sugar to refineries, merchants grew rich, empires grew fat. Mainstream fact? By the 18th century, sugar had transformed from luxury to necessity. Cakes, puddings, jams, European households couldn't imagine life without it. Sugar fueled calories for workers in the Industrial Revolution itself. Quirky tidbit? Tooth decay, once rare in Europe, exploded with the rise of sugar. Archaeologists can literally trace the empire's sweet tooth by examining skeletons. Carries of empire, some call it. Coffee and tea, the drink of revolutions. Coffee houses sprouted in Ottoman lands first, then spread to London, Paris, Boston. They were called penny universities, for with a single cup, you could debate politics, science, and philosophy with anyone. Poets scribbled, merchants schemed, revolutionaries whispered. Mainstream fact? Voltaire, the French Enlightenment thinker, reportedly drank up to 50 cups of coffee a day. He called it his fuel for thought. In London, Lloyd's Coffee House became the birthplace of Lloyd's of London, still one of the world's greatest insurance markets. Tea meanwhile swept through England like fire. Imported from China, it quickly became a national obsession. Afternoon tea, elegant and refined, hit its global cost. British silver drained east, opium wars erupted, and India was reshaped to grow tea. Quirky tidbit? The Boston Tea Party of 1773 wasn't just about taxes. It was about taste. Colonists had become addicted to tea, and when Parliament taxed it, they dumped 342 chests into the harbor. That act of rebellion brewed not only tea but revolution. Chocolate, from bitter to sweet. We return to cacao, once a bitter ceremonial drink of the Maya and Aztecs. In Europe, with sugar and milk, it became a sweet, velvety indulgence. Courts of Spain and France embraced it, doctors prescribed it for vigor, and soon it trickled down to cafes and kitchens. Mainstream fact? In the 17th century, some Spanish monks argued over whether drinking hot chocolate during fasting broke the fast. It became a theological debate, proof of how central this new food had become. Quirky tidbit? Casanova himself praised chocolate as an aphrodisiac. He claimed it gave him strength for romance, a reputation that helped chocolate gain its aura of seduction. Empires built on flavor. Spices, sugar, coffee, tea, chocolate, each was more than taste. They were reasons for war, slavery, colonization, and resistance. They sweetened Europe while souring the lives of millions in Asia, Africa, and the Americas. And yet, these same foods stirred minds, sparked movements, and reshaped cultures. Without tea, would Britain's identity exist as we know it? Without coffee, would Enlightenment cafes have birthed revolutions? Without sugar, would industry have had its energy? Close your eyes and imagine. Dutch merchants weighing nutmeg like treasure in candlelit halls. Enslaved workers cutting sugarcane with blistered hands under the Caribbean sun. French philosophers scribbling in smoky coffee houses, fueled by endless cups. English ladies pouring tea into porcelain cups, unaware of the wars behind it. American colonists hurling tea into Boston Harbor, shouting for liberty. This was not just food, it was destiny in a cup, empire on a spoon, history in a grain of sugar. The story of food had become the story of globalization. And you, traveler, now sip its legacy each morning with your tea or coffee, each bite of chocolate, each sprinkle of spice. But the journey does not stop here. The next chapter awaits. The rise of industrial foods, the age of canned goods, railroads carrying beef and wheat, global hunger and abundance side by side. The banquet of history is far from over. You walk into the 19th century where smokestacks rise, iron rails stretch across continents, and the very rhythm of eating begins to change forever. This is the Industrial Revolution, the age when food left the field and entered the factory. Factories, mills, and mechanized bread. For thousands of years, bread had been baked locally, grain milled by hand, baked by village ovens, eaten fresh. But now, massive steam-powered mills ground flour faster and cheaper. Railroads carried it across entire nations. Bread became whiter, softer, more uniform. Mainstream fact? By the mid-1800s, industrial bread replaced traditional loaves across Europe and America. White flour, once a sign of wealth, became affordable to the working class. Quirky tidbit? Some critics of the time complained that industrial flour was lifeless. Doctors warned it lacked nutrients, stripped by the new roller mills. In fact, the rise of white bread is often linked to 19th century malnutrition, proving not all progress was wholesome. Canning, a revolution in a tin. It began with Napoleon's challenge: feed an army that marched across Europe. In 1809, a Frenchman, Nicolas Appert, discovered that sealing food in glass jars and heating them preserved it. Soon after, tin cans took over. Soldiers could march with meat, peas, soups sealed tight. Explorers carried cans to the Arctic and Africa. For the first time, food was not bound to the season or the harvest. It was eternal, waiting inside a metal box. Mainstream fact? By the American Civil War 1860s, canned food fed entire armies. Civilians followed, stocking pantries with canned peaches, tomatoes, and condensed milk. Quirky tidbit? Early cans were so thick they needed hammer and chisel to open. Soldiers in the Crimean War joked they were eating more iron than beef. The modern can opener wasn't invented until 1858, decades after canned food existed. Refrigeration, cold chains of empire. For centuries, ice was cut from frozen lakes and stored in cellars, melting through the summer. But now, with industrial refrigeration and later electric fridges, food could travel across oceans. Fresh beef from Argentina or lamb from New Zealand reached London dinner tables. Fish from the North Atlantic appeared in Paris markets within days. The world's menu expanded. Mainstream fact? Refrigerated rail cars in the US transformed diets. Chicago's slaughterhouses processed cattle, packed the beef in ice and shipped it east. The hog butcher for the world, they called it. Quirky tidbit? In 1879, the first successful refrigerated ship, the Dunedin, carried frozen meat from New Zealand to Britain. The voyage was so astonishing that newspapers called it the miracle of cold. Britain would never eat the same again. Industrial sugar, beer and soda. Sugar refineries, beer breweries and soda factories boomed. No longer handmade, drinks were bottled by the thousands. Carbonation, once a luxury, became everyday refreshment. By the late 19th century, names like Coca-Cola and Pepsi appeared, symbols of a new kind of global food empire. Mainstream fact? Coca-Cola was invented in 1886 as a medicinal tonic, containing coca leaf extract and caffeine-rich cola nut. Within decades, it became one of the world's most consumed beverages. Quirky tidbit? Early Coca-Cola actually contained traces of cocaine. It was only fully removed by 1929, but by then the brand had already conquered the world's taste buds. The rise of processed foods. Factories churned out biscuits, cereals, condensed milk, and candy bars. The working class, pressed for time, turned to ready-made foods. What once took hours in a home kitchen could now be bought instantly. Mainstream fact? In 1863, James Caleb Jackson created the first ready-to-eat breakfast cereal, made of baked graham flour. It was called Granula. John Harvey Kellogg later popularized corn flakes, sparking the cereal revolution. Quirky tidbit? Kellogg originally designed corn flakes to reduce sexual desire, believing bland foods calmed the body. Instead, they became a sugary breakfast icon worldwide. The age of hunger and plenty. The Industrial Revolution was a paradox. While cities filled with cheap bread, canned goods, and sugar, millions still starved. Ireland's Great Famine, 1845 to 1852, killed 1 million, caused by potato blight and political neglect. India suffered repeated famines under colonial grain policies. Mainstream fact? Railroads could have moved food to the starving, but profit dictated exports instead. Famines were not only natural disasters, they were political choices. Quirky tidbit? In Victorian England, the working poor often survived on bread, tea, and dripping fat from roasts. 3BS, some joked bitterly, bread, butter, and beer. Close your eyes and imagine. Factory wheels grinding flour into pale white powder by the ton. Soldiers in muddy trenches hammering open cans of beef. A Victorian child staring wide-eyed at fizzy bubbles in her first soda. Steamships unloading frozen lamb from half a world away. Families gathered around the breakfast table, eating cereal born of an accidental health crusade. The world had entered a new era. Food no longer local, no longer seasonal, no longer slow. It was industrial, global, unstoppable. But this was only the beginning. The next chapter would bring wars, rations, global hunger, and the strange modern age of fast food, supermarkets, and convenience meals. The banquet of history now tasted of tin, sugar, and steel. Now you arrive in the 20th century where 2 world wars tear apart continents and food, once abundant in industrial nations, becomes a weapon, a ration, a desperate necessity. This is the century of hunger and innovation, where survival reshaped the very meals on your table. World War I, the first rationing. When the Great War erupted in 1914, armies needed food by the millions of tons. Governments seized grain, canned meat, sugar, and fats to feed soldiers. Civilians at home were left with less. Mainstream fact? Britain introduced its first official rationing in 1917, limiting bread, sugar, and meat. Posters urged citizens, eat less, waste nothing, victory depends on it. Quirky tidbit? In Germany, the K-Brot, K-bread, mixed sawdust and potato flour to stretch supplies. Many civilians joked grimly they were eating the forest. The rise of substitutes. Coffee? Replaced with roasted barley. Butter? Substituted by margarine. Meat? Stretched with oats or soybeans. Rationing taught people to accept ersatz food, cheap replacements that filled stomachs but rarely satisfied. Mainstream fact? The US encouraged meatless Mondays and wheatless Wednesdays, persuading families to change their diet voluntarily to support troops overseas. Quirky tidbit? Peanut butter skyrocketed in popularity during this time as a cheap protein substitute. Once a fringe food, it became a staple in American homes. World War II, total war, total rationing. If World War I strained diets, World War II reshaped them completely. Every major nation enforced ration books. Sugar, butter, coffee, gasoline, even clothing were tightly controlled. Mainstream fact? In Britain, each person was limited to 1 egg per week, a few ounces of meat, and tiny rations of sugar. People grew vegetables in victory gardens, turning backyards and public parks into fields. By 1944, nearly 40% of Britain's vegetables came from these gardens. Quirky tidbit? In the US, families were encouraged to raise chickens in their yards. A chicken in every backyard became both food security and patriotic duty. Children proudly fed hens to supply eggs for the family. Food as propaganda. Nations weaponized food imagery. Posters showed plump soldiers smiling over canned beef. Leaflets dropped on enemy cities mocked shortages. Mainstream fact? The Allies even bombed German food supplies, knowing hunger could weaken morale. Food wasn't just nutrition, it was strategy. Quirky tidbit? In occupied France, people brewed coffee substitutes from acorns and chicory. Some joked the coffee was so bitter, it tasted like revenge. Innovation under pressure. Wartime urgency accelerated food technology. Powdered milk and instant coffee became vital for soldiers. Spam, invented in 1937, became famous during World War II. Cheap, salty, endlessly shelf-stable, it fed Allied troops from the Pacific to Europe. Dehydrated foods like powdered eggs and soups allowed lighter transport. Mainstream fact? GIs returning from the war brought home habits of canned meat, instant coffee, and chocolate bars. Many wartime foods became permanent parts of post-war diets. Quirky tidbit? In Hawaii, Spam became so beloved during wartime scarcity that even today, it remains a cultural icon, eaten in sushi, sandwiches, and breakfast plates. Hawaiians consume more Spam per capita than any other place on Earth. The birth of fast food. After World War II, economies roared back. Soldiers returned, suburbs spread, cars dominated, and diets changed again. People wanted quick, cheap meals. And thus, fast food was born. Mainstream fact? In 1940, two brothers named Richard and Maurice McDonald opened a drive-in barbecue stand in California. By 1948, they streamlined it into a hamburger assembly line. Ray Kroc later franchised it into the global giant, McDonald's. Quirky tidbit? The drive-through culture wasn't just convenience, it was tied to America's love of the automobile. Teenagers cruised highways, pulled into diners, and ate burgers under neon lights. Food became not just sustenance but part of pop culture. Supermarkets in the age of abundance. While rationing ended, a new kind of control arrived, the supermarket. Shiny aisles stacked with packaged goods, frozen dinners, and branded cereals offered the illusion of endless choice. Mainstream fact? Clarence Birdseye revolutionized frozen food in the 1920s, but it wasn't until post-World War II that frozen vegetables, fish sticks, and TV dinners exploded in popularity. Quirky tidbit? The first frozen TV dinner by Swanson in 1953 came packaged in an aluminum tray, marketed as the perfect meal while watching television. Americans loved the novelty. 10 million were sold in the first year. Close your eyes and picture. A British family huddled around a meager wartime meal. One potato, a scrap of butter, a single egg divided between children. Soldiers in the trenches tearing open cans of Spam, steam rising in the cold night air. Victory gardens blooming in unexpected corners of cities. Tomatoes growing where bombs once fell. Post-war teenagers in leather jackets, eating hamburgers at chrome diners under jukebox lights. Housewives in 1950s kitchens, pulling frozen pies from the freezer, marveling at modern miracle meals. Food had become industrial, political, cultural, and global. The wars had shown that control over food meant control over nations. And in the peacetime that followed, convenience became king. The world was racing toward a modern diet, fast, cheap, abundant, but not without consequences. The century of war had ended. But now came the century of supermarkets, fast food chains, and processed abundance, the diet we still live with today. You step into the modern era where food is no longer just survival or even just comfort. It is industry, advertising, globalization, and controversy. Never before in human history has food been so abundant, yet so questioned. The processed food revolution. The second half of the 20th century saw food transformed from fresh ingredients into engineered products. Factories and laboratories replaced farms and kitchens. Mainstream fact? Between the 1960s and 1980s, shelf-stable goods exploded: boxed cereals, instant noodles, frozen pizzas, canned soups. Shoppers filled carts with items their grandparents wouldn't even recognize as food. Quirky tidbit? Cereal companies began competing for children's attention by adding marshmallows, sugar, and cartoon mascots. Breakfast became less about eggs and toast, more about neon-colored rings and chocolate puffs. Globalization on a plate. Air travel, refrigeration, and container shipping meant foods once rare became global staples. Sushi appeared in American malls. Pizza spread from Italy to every corner of the globe. Thai curries, Mexican tacos, Indian chicken tikka masala, all became everyday meals far from their homelands. Mainstream fact? By the 2000s, avocados from Mexico, bananas from Ecuador, and salmon from Norway could be found in supermarkets worldwide, no longer tied to seasons. Quirky tidbit? Chicken tikka masala, often thought of as Indian, is actually a British invention, created in Glasgow when a customer complained their curry was too dry, leading the chef to add tomato cream sauce. Globalization created hybrid foods without borders. Fast food becomes global. If McDonald's began the fast food empire, the late 20th century saw it go international. By the 1990s, the Golden Arches could be found in Moscow, Beijing, and Rio de Janeiro. Mainstream fact? Economists even coined the Big Mac Index to measure purchasing power parity worldwide, using the price of a burger to compare economies. Quirky tidbit? In India, where beef is taboo for Hindus, McDonald's replaced the beef patty with spiced potatoes and chicken. In Japan, they offered shrimp burgers. Global menus adapted, creating local twists on global brands. The age of diets and health crises. Abundance came with a price. Obesity, diabetes, and heart disease rose sharply, especially in developed nations. Suddenly, people questioned whether the very convenience they celebrated was killing them. Mainstream fact? In the US, obesity rates tripled from the 1970s to the 2000s, coinciding with the rise of soda, fast food, and ultra-processed snacks. Quirky tidbit? In 1982, Coca-Cola released Diet Coke, not just a new product but a cultural phenomenon, marking the start of light, low-fat, sugar-free trends. Some studies showed, ironically, that diet sodas were linked to more cravings. Food and identity. For the first time, food wasn't just about class or survival, it became a statement of who you were. Vegan, paleo, keto, organic, your plate became part of your personality. Mainstream fact? The organic food industry grew from a fringe movement in the 1970s to a multi-billion-dollar global market by the 2000s. Labels like non-GMO and all-natural became selling points, even when consumers didn't fully understand them. Quirky tidbit? The word superfood isn't a scientific category at all, it's a marketing invention. Yet it made blueberries, kale, and quinoa global stars. Farmers in Peru who once ate quinoa modestly for centuries suddenly found it too expensive, as Western demand skyrocketed. Food as entertainment. Cooking shows, celebrity chefs, Instagram feeds, all turned eating into spectacle. Food wasn't just consumed, it was displayed, photographed, judged. Mainstream fact? Julia Childs, the French chef in the 1960s, introduced Americans to French cuisine. Decades later, the Food Network and Gordon Ramsay brought kitchens into primetime entertainment. Quirky tidbit? The phrase "phone eats first" became a meme, as millions snapped photos of their meals before tasting them. In a sense, food became digital, consumed twice, once by eyes online, once by mouths at the table. The return of ancient diets. Ironically, as technology advanced, many turned backward, seeking inspiration from ancestors. The Mediterranean diet, the Japanese diet, even paleo, a return to presumed Stone Age eating. Mainstream fact? The Mediterranean diet, rich in olive oil, fish, vegetables, and whole grains, is scientifically linked to longer life and reduced heart disease. Quirky tidbit? The paleo diet imagines eating like cavemen, meat, nuts, berries, but ignores the fact that Paleolithic humans ate what they could find, which varied widely and often included insects and roots modern paleo followers wouldn't touch. Close your eyes and picture a fluorescent supermarket aisle glowing with thousands of packages, each shouting with bright logos and promises. A Big Mac in New York, a shrimp burger in Tokyo, a paneer wrap in Delhi, all wearing the same golden arches. A kale smoothie posted on Instagram with the hashtag clean eating. A Peruvian farmer shaking his head at foreigners calling quinoa superfood, while his village struggles to afford their own crop. A family eating pizza delivered by drone, the old comfort food with a futuristic twist. This is the paradox of modern eating. Never before has food been so global, so engineered, so visible, and never before have we worried so much about what it does to us. The plate has become a battlefield between pleasure and health, tradition and technology, globalization and identity. The story of food is not over, it's moving faster than ever. You stand at the threshold of tomorrow, where the story of food is still being written. For thousands of years, humanity chased survival, comfort, and pleasure through what it ate. Now, in the 21st century and beyond, the question becomes, how will we feed billions more without destroying the planet, or ourselves? The rise of lab-grown and alternative proteins. Scientists are reimagining meat itself. Instead of raising animals, they grow muscle tissue in bioreactors, producing what looks, cooks, and tastes like steak, without slaughter. Mainstream fact? In 2013, the world's first lab-grown burger was unveiled in London. It cost $330,000 to make. By the 2020s, the price dropped dramatically, with startups racing to bring cultured chicken, beef, and fish to supermarkets. Quirky tidbit? Singapore became the first country to approve lab-grown chicken for sale in restaurants. Diners described it as just chicken, but futuristic. Some compared it to eating something from a sci-fi novel. Insects on the menu. Billions already eat crickets, grasshoppers, and mealworms. For Western consumers, this still feels strange, but that may change. Insects are high in protein, require little water, and can be farmed sustainably. Mainstream fact? The UN has promoted edible insects as a key to solving global food shortages and climate change. Quirky tidbit? Cricket flour has quietly made its way into protein bars and chips in the US, marketed without pictures of insects to avoid scaring off buyers. The slogan? Protein with a crunch. Vertical farms and smart agriculture. Picture skyscrapers not of glass offices, but stacked layers of lettuce, tomatoes, and herbs under glowing LED lights. This is vertical farming, cities growing their own food indoors year-round. Mainstream fact? Vertical farms use up to 90% less water than traditional agriculture and don't rely on pesticides. Quirky tidbit? Some vertical farms experiment with playing music to plants. Believe it or not, certain frequencies of sound may encourage faster growth. Imagine a farm where lettuce grows to the rhythm of Mozart. 3D printed meals. Your future dinner might come not from a pot, but from a printer nozzle. With edible inks made from pureed vegetables, proteins, or even chocolate, 3D printers can craft complex shapes and textures. Mainstream fact? NASA has funded research into 3D printed pizza for astronauts. Each layer, dough, sauce, cheese, extruded in perfect order. Quirky tidbit? Some chefs dream of custom-printed gourmet dishes, like pasta shaped exactly into your initials, or birthday cakes that grow layer by layer before your eyes. Food and artificial intelligence. AI is already shaping what ends up on your plate. From optimizing crop yields to creating new flavor combinations, machines may become tomorrow's chefs. Mainstream fact? IBM's AI chef Watson once generated recipes humans had never imagined, combining unlikely ingredients that surprisingly worked. Quirky tidbit? A Japanese AI system created entirely new flavors of candy, so unique that they didn't even fit into sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami. They tasted like the future itself. Climate change and food security. But the challenges are just as great as the innovations. Rising seas, shifting rainfall, and warming climates threaten crops worldwide. Staple foods, rice, wheat, maize, face declining yields in hotter conditions. Mainstream fact? By 2050, global food demand may increase by 60%, while arable land shrinks. Feeding 10 billion people will test every solution we have. Quirky tidbit? Some scientists are reviving ancient grains like millet and amaranth, once neglected because they survive in harsh climates. In a twist of fate, the foods of the past may become the foods of the future. The ethics of eating. Technology also forces us to confront moral questions. If meat can be grown without killing, should we ever slaughter again? If insects save the planet, should we overcome disgust? If AI cooks better than us, what becomes of tradition? Mainstream fact? Surveys show younger generations are more willing to embrace alternative proteins, while older ones cling to tradition. Food divides not just classes or nations but generations. Quirky tidbit? Philosophers already debate whether a cultured steak counts as vegan, since it was made without an animal dying. The definitions of meat, diet and identity blur in the future. Close your eyes and picture. A glowing skyscraper farm in New York, strawberries ripening in vertical towers. A family in California biting into a lab-grown burger, unable to tell the difference from beef. An astronaut floating in space, eating a 3D printed pizza, smiling as cheese drifts in zero gravity. Children in Africa nourished by protein-rich cricket bread, ending cycles of hunger. A couple in Tokyo clinking glasses of algae wine, green, sparkling, oddly delicious. The future of food is not just about taste. It is about survival, technology, ethics, and imagination. For millennia, food told the story of who we were. In the coming century, it will tell the story of who we are becoming. Will humanity choose lab meat, insect snacks, printed dinners, or some mix of all? Whatever path we take, one truth remains: food will always be at the center of our story. And so, your journey ends not with a final meal, but with a question: what will you eat tomorrow? And now, as our long journey through the history of food comes to a close, let your mind rest for a moment. You have wandered with me across deserts and fields, through smoky hearths and candlelit banquets, across ancient temples and futuristic kitchens. You have tasted bread both coarse and delicate, heard the clatter of copper pots and the whisper of machines that print tomorrow's meals. And yet, through it all, one thread has held steady. Food has always been there to keep us alive, to comfort us, and to gather us together. Allow your breathing to slow, as if you are sitting by a quiet fire after a long day. Picture the faint glow of embers, the warmth touching your skin, and the soft fragrance of something simple simmering on the hearth. Outside, the world is silent. Inside, everything you need has already been given. The future of food, like all futures, remains uncertain. But you need not hold that weight tonight. Tonight, you may set it gently down. Trust that, just as countless generations before you have eaten, celebrated, and endured, so too will tomorrow bring nourishment in some form. Humanity's story of food is, in the end, a story of care and continuity. So let the final images soften: green fields fading into the distance, a loaf cooling on a wooden table, a bowl of warm soup held in steady hands. Nothing more is needed. Nothing is missing. Only rest. And as you close your eyes, imagine these words dissolving into a calm whisper: you have traveled far, you are safe now, and it is time to sleep.